Finally back with another fake rock waterfall. This one is specifically designed for the beginner. So a lot of the other waterfalls I've done have been much more elaborate, a lot more detail. Be sure to check those out on the channel. But this one was definitely the fastest, and I would say the easiest as far as the difficulty level of any of the waterfalls I've done. I've taken so long in uploading a new video because I was working on the second channel, and what I'm doing there is trying to work on a series of videos where I'm teaching you how to draw realistically. First video in that series is where I draw a self-portrait, so check that out when you get the chance. But back to this, so we've got the fake rock beginner waterfall here. So what I did is I tried to make this as fast as possible, but not compromise any type of safety feature or the physics of how the waterfall works, or if there's going to be, a leak. So all of that was done as I've done in the past. You see the back there where the cord is coming out. You've got this second piece that covers up the water pump. So this is primarily based on the autumn-themed waterfall, and I'll show that a little bit later. But this took roughly a little less than a month to create, where the autumn-themed waterfall was almost 4 months. So, and there's probably, if you watch this throughout, you can probably come up with different ways of creating this even faster and even easier, by cutting out certain stages I did, or adding to, or taking away some of the detail. You don't have to add even the detail that I've added to this beginner project. Of course, you can put a fogger like I've got in there now to increase the look of it. And of course, you can, with certain types of foggers, add lights, increase the look if that's what you want to do. So starting out, you want to have a dust mask of some sort. Usually I've been using that white dust mask, but have recently graduated to a little bit more safer, more professional dust mask because I'm doing this a lot. And you want to be near an open window if you are using hot wires. I'm going to be using a couple of hot wires from the Hot Wire Foam Factory. So check them out. I've got a couple of wires, one that's flexible, the other that is more of a straight knife, and have a couple of different water pumps. I'm going to be using that larger one, but you can, here's another one. I'm sure there's many other small water pumps for a waterfall of this size. So like I said earlier, I'm going to be basing this on the mechanics or basic structure of how the water is falling and being taken in, and how the pump is being covered up, basing this entirely on the autumn themed waterfall. So you can check this one out, this video, and you might get ideas from this, but I'm essentially basing everything on this, but I'm taking away almost all of the detail as far as the time, and of course it's a little bit smaller than the autumn themed waterfall, but it's essentially the same setup. So starting out here, I'm going to use that taller water pump, which happens to have a filter in it. And I'm just going to draw around a thin piece of polystyrene. And be sure to check out the materials list video. Everything's on the channel, of course. And drawing out that upper pond area where the water is going to initially fall out into. So taking the hot wire and cutting out some rectangles that are going to end up constructing that pond that's on the floor of the design. So all of these pieces are 3 inches tall, and I'm doing this because I want to make sure that lower pond is of a certain height because of the water pump, because of the intake. And the water pump, the water's got to be at a certain level. So putting down these pieces without gluing them down, just in case you want to go back later and move those around to get a different shape. But I've cut all those out in varying shapes, not really knowing where I'm going to put them at first. Here I'm measuring out a piece that is going to be like a 1/4 inch taller than that water pump. So a whole bunch of pieces that are taller by about a 1/4 inch than that water pump. Going to cut those out, and this is going to make up the covering for that water filter. So I want it a little bit bigger. You want to give the cylindrical water filter a little bit of room to breathe, so it's going to go around it with maybe a 1/2 inch or an inch, probably an inch, all around it. So I've got a piece here that is going to go underneath where the water is going to flow out of the water pump. So it's got a good 1/4 inch below the water pump. So you can see a little bit of a gap there. And this is something where you can glue these pieces together like this, but what I usually like to do is cut at an angle so that these pieces can fit together a little more uniformly. So I've got these pieces cut out, or I will cut out the rest in the same way so that they can sort of fit together a little better in going around that water filter in creating sort of a cylinder. So I'm going to glue these down onto the base polystyrene sheet, and using Loctite's Power Grab adhesive. Again, everything is in the materials list video. So I'm going to glue those down onto the sheet and to each other in that sort of cylinder that is going to cover up the water pump. So that's how it's looking there so far. Got that piece that's going to start the build of where the water is going to flow out into that smaller pine. Sometimes what I'll do is use a magic marker to mark where a certain piece is, so if I get called away from it, I'll know exactly where that was. I'm going to glue that piece into place now. And doing the same thing with that lower pond series of pieces where I've got certain pieces cut at an angle so that they will fit together a little bit better when I'm gluing those in. And then this taller piece is where the water is going to flow out the main fall. So it's going to flow out down that into the main pond, up the water pump, and just repeat. So I've got this piece here where this is going to help catch the water, and that is that piece right there in the finished product, just to give you a reference point. So I'm going to kind of draw out a little crescent shape. This is really just to try to conform to the shape of that cylinder of the water pump. So a lot of these steps are kind of, you can, if you watch this enough and go over your own design, you can kind of tell they're optional stages within here just to try to make your design flow easier as far as the water. Pulling the filter out so you can see what that looks like. And then again, in keeping with what I just said with certain optional steps, these are little pieces that are going to help guide, make sure that water goes where it's supposed to go and not where you don't want it. So taking the hot wire, I'm going to cut out a little piece here. This is going to ensure that the water is going to flow right there because it's going to be lower than the rest of the area of that first pond. So I've got a piece here where I've got drawn out the top pond or reservoir where all that water is going to initially flow into before falling. I'm going to cut that out and glue that into place a little bit lower just to be able to get some sort of depth to that first reservoir. I'm going to glue that in, and really one of the mistakes I made with this project is I didn't wait for that piece to dry. And sometimes you want to use a level, try to make sure it's going to work properly. But you'll want to make sure that piece is dry before you move on, because I ended up putting my hand right through it, so it wasn't dry yet. realizing that there is nothing underneath it to support it, and yet when you glue these other taller pieces to it on the side like that, it does act as a support system, and there's not enough water in that little area when the project's done anyway to be able to cause a problem with any type of weight, seeing as how it doesn't have support. By all means, if you're making a larger version of this waterfall, you might want to have support underneath that, but I'm just gluing together now these little side pieces to flesh out that pond, making sure those pieces are taller than the output of the water going down the fall. I've got a little piece here to just sort of assist in that ramp, really another optional piece. Here's something where you're gonna want to make sure that you're plugging up these gaps in both of the ponds to make sure you don't have any issues with leaking. So I'm just taking the same glue that I'm using to glue everything together, and I'm gonna just patch in those areas where they're going to be gaps from just this process of gluing together not perfectly cut out pieces of polystyrene. So I've got a couple of different chunks showing that at hardware stores you can get different varying thicknesses. So I've got the thicker and the thin. You can just build up the thin if you don't have the thick, which I'm showing here on the right. That's a thicker piece, and then on the left it's just 3 pieces of the thinner polystyrene. So if you're needing to build up size or mass, you can just always glue together several of these thinner pieces. And that's what I'm doing here is I'm going to build up that landscape up to that height, the 3 inches of where that pond ends up, just to build that up and build up the landscape. So here, gluing together some of those chunks just kind of randomly cut out, and just kind of showing you can use these smaller pieces. I'm just going to use this as a way of completing that vertical build up to the mouth of the pond, and just really essentially using a lot of scrap pieces that I've got, and it might be from this project or the last project, and using some of that same thicker foam to build up some size around that cylindrical covering for the water pump. Here I've got the hot wire. It's turned off because I'm going to be bending it, showing you can, with some of these wires, bend them into different shapes. So it's off now. If it were on, it would be burning me. So you want to be safe there. So now I've got it on. It's taken some time to heat up, and I'm just going to go through some of those thicker pieces and kind of moving them back and forth as a way of creating more of a organic look. So, and another thing you can do, kind of discovered with this project, is varying techniques of like wiggling the wire back and forth to create these ridges. You can really get into some realistic looking rock using these wires. And then going back through and trying to break up some of the patterns you'll get with those wires. So here I've got another piece, and I'm going to just use a knife just to show you that you can really do this entire project without a hot wire. It's just the hot wire makes it easier. The other thing is the knife or using your fingers to pick at it creates a horrendous mess. And it was quite a mess after I did this one piece that I ended up using the hot wire for all the other pieces. But just to show you can do this and create a semi-comparable rock-like looking piece of foam. So one on the left is the one done with a hot wire, and one on the right is one done with a knife and me just picking at it with my fingers. So that is the one done with the knife, and the rest of them were done with the hot wire, just to show you can do that. And this one turned out particularly interesting with the hot wire. So in here I'm at the back of that first pond, is really the back of the entire thing, and I'm going to put some panels in, and really I'm just using my fingers here. The piece is so thin. Just trying to create this randomly picked at piece to potentially give that piece texture to make it look more like rock. So that's what I'll do for the rest of those pieces on the back. Then I'll glue in these taller pieces to that cylindrical area covering up the filter. And here, just, you can obviously, I could have used the hot wire, but a really good way is really just to pick at it to try to create this random rock look. Of course, you can use the knife, create some more distinct areas, but it's something that is there's really no artistic skill level going on here. You're just I'm randomly cutting at it and picking at it. So again, in keeping with the goal of trying to create a project that is easier, this definitely fits into that description of trying to make it easier, trying to make it faster by just really showing you that it doesn't take really any artistic skill level whatsoever. And that was that area where I was cutting out for the cord to go into the water pump. But I've got a flat piece here that I'm going to start the second piece. So this piece is this project is made up of two pieces. One, the entire waterfall, and one that's really, its main purpose is to cover up that water pump. So I've got that other piece there, and it's looking essentially like that. You've got a nice little right angle where that will do the job of covering up the water filter. So and with all these projects I do, I try to leave a healthy gap. If you've got two pieces that are going to be fitting together, you'll benefit from keeping gaps. It just allows you to be able to fit those two back together much easier than if you were trying to make it perfect as far as fitting together now, because I'm going to add a mortar later in the form of foam coat. So got little pieces here that I'm just trying to cover up the mouth of that water filter. So your goal, you could do this several different ways. It doesn't have to be like this, but your goal is to try to camouflage that water pump so that it, as much as possible, looks like a natural waterfall. Now enjoy this intermission. All right, intermission time. I shared this a couple of times before in other videos, going completely off topic. But I feel since some of these videos can get a lot of views, I think it's a great opportunity to share the most important thing one can ever learn in this life. And that is, salvation comes through one individual, Jesus Christ. I say this because I didn't know this until I was around 34. Everyone should have the chance of hearing this. Whether there is fertile ground out there or not with those listening is something I don't know, but I feel compelled to do it, in part because I would have wanted it done for me. Jesus Christ is who he claimed to be, the Son of God, who is essentially offering you a free gift of eternal life. He paid for all of our punishment on the cross, so that we wouldn't have to pay for our own wrongdoings in eternity. This doesn't give you a license to do wrong. He asks you to repent or turn from your wrong actions and follow him. I think a lot of people believe, as I used to believe, in that your good is going to outweigh your bad. The problem is that wouldn't hold up in court, even with our standards, let alone God's. If you were in court for a specific crime, but you told the judge about all the good you've done in your past, should that affect his decision about the crime you're currently in court for? Of course it wouldn't. The bottom line is there is no other way apart from a Savior. Trust in Jesus' work on the cross as being the only way the ultimate judge can grant you salvation and eternal life. Thanks for listening. All right, thanks for listening to that. So I've got these two pieces that are covering up that mouth of the water pump, and using the hot wire, I could have just picked at this, with my fingers to try to get away from those straight edges to make the project look more organic. So I've got a panel here cut out using the hot wire. And I'm going to glue that onto that second piece to, again, just try to create more of a realistic look, and taking a knife and gouging into it, picking at it to try to create more texture. And you're really wanting to do this in a completely random way. And same thing with that pond. I'm just going to use my fingers to try to get rid of those straight edges and try to make it as uneven and natural looking as possible. Of course, I can use the hot wire to do the same thing, kind of more effortlessly. But here we've got where the water is going to flow out, basically where somebody's eye will go when they're looking at the finished product. And this is kind of important. You can see on the top right there that it really, to put this little piece, really kind of gives it that look of a waterfall, because it kind of separates it from just cascading straight down that vertical panel. Instead, it's got this little piece where it has to flow over it. So here I've just got random leftover scrap pieces that I'm going to try to break apart into little rocks that I'm going to put on top of that second piece, and a few of them throughout the main landscape. So just trying to have the landscape, going up and down and looking more realistic. The more of this stuff you put on there. So gluing those into place. And like I said, with that main landscape, putting in a few little pieces here and there so the landscape's going up and down a little bit, so it's not so flat according to that entry of the pond. So in here you've got, with these little pieces in the back, this kind of pattern where it looks a little bit unnatural, and I'm going to try to offset that by just cramming in some scrap leftover pieces here and there, using some of the glue and just putting those in there to break up that pattern that has kind of inadvertently happened. So I'm going to go ahead and cut away the base. I'm going to break off this base and essentially use those pieces later for scrap. So there it is, cut away. And with every project, as I was mentioning at some point earlier in the video, that you'll inevitably have these gaps where you can either fill with thin pieces of foam, or an easier way to do this is just take some of that glue, some of the same adhesive that I'm using to glue the thing together, and putting it into those gaps, because this will make the process of adding the mortar that you choose a lot easier, because the mortar's not going to go into those gaps. It'll save you a little bit of money as well. So I'm going to glue in some little rocks, 2 or 3 or 4 here and there in the couple of ponds that I've got, just adding to the look, but I'm really not spending a lot of time on it. Now's the stage of adding the mortar. Now you can use foam coat. This is from the hot wire foam factory. Just follow the directions. But in the past, I've used non-sanded grout of any color, because you're going to paint it. But you'll want to add some sort of strengthening agent. And this is what this is. Now, I would definitely recommend foam coat more than non-sanded grout, because it's specifically designed to be placed on foam. And because of that, it doesn't crack as much, it doesn't flake off as much as non-sanded grout. So just putting on one good layer, and if you're going to make this for a living creature, you'll definitely want to put on 2 good layers to strengthen it. And another thing is, if you are making it for a living creature, you want to research whether or not that critter is going to actually appreciate water in their cage. It might be a better idea for you to just make a waterfall for yourself and leave your pet out of it. So there's obvious critters that would appreciate it: Chinese water dragons, certain types of toads and turtles and frogs and whatnot, but this is definitely not for a bearded dragon. It's obviously, there's the danger of drowning for any creature, so you're taking that risk with anything. But there's also the danger of raising the humidity level too much for certain creatures. So do your research on that and really try to decide, are you making this for them or are you making it for yourself? And, make it for yourself and leave it out of their cage. So I've got the second piece here over top of the bowl, trying to save on foam coat because excess just drips down in there. And here's a interesting technique. Again, no skill level going on here. I'm just tapping this. I'm using some leftover wet foam coat and I'm just creating texture. So everything's covered already, but I'm going over everything except for that second piece. I forgot to do it. But creating texture by just tapping. And you'll later see when I do the paint job how much that adds to the look of it. Using my gloves after that's dried for 24 hours and kind of going over certain spots and making sure there's no weak spots. The other thing I'm trying to do is I'm making sure there's no sharp edges. You want to get rid of those. Sometimes it's one of the results of using a mortar is there'll be some sharp edges. You want to break those off. So I'm painting a layer of non-toxic water-resistant sealant onto all of the areas that are going to have water on it just to do a test. So I'm going to paint all over where the water is going to flow. You want to do a test just to make sure that that there's not any major structural errors, there's not any major leaks, that it might not be flowing the water as you would like it visually. So, but just to make sure that it is actually working before you go ahead and put all the time into the detail, you'll want to ideally do a test. So putting the water filter in there, added water, and I found out with this test everything was working perfectly. I mean, you could do a test and figure out that the water has to go higher than you've made the pond height to be for the water pump to work, because the intake has to have a certain height, certain depth to that water to be able to start the flow of water, being pumped up. So little things like that where you can easily, or a lot more easily, correct the situation than if you had already done all the detail. So it's the painting stage. This is more the fun part. So I've got a water bottle from a dollar store that I bought. Put some water, obviously, and some acrylic paint in there. I've got a really dark gray. And you want to make sure that you don't have too much paint or it won't be able to get through the nozzle of the water bottle. So when in doubt, use a little bit too thin of a mixture, a little bit too much water, and you can always add paint, or you can just keep doing layers to build up that color. But I always like to build up a color that is dark, whether it be dark gray or dark green, because then it's just easier to sort of, it's essentially like working on a black canvas where you build up from this dark color. So mixing up some very light gray here, ended up putting a lot more white into that. So I've got this second piece, got it turned over to an area where no one's ever going to see this because it's the underside of the piece, just to do a test area, just so you can see what this looks like. This is with the brush wet. So this is completely wet. That's how it looks. And if you're wanting to do this technique of the dry brush technique where you get rid of most of the paint on a paper towel or rag, and you can see once my hand gets out of the way, the look of it, basically the texture of the surface peels off a little bit of the paint. And you'll see, especially with the landscape itself, that because I put that texture on there earlier, it's pulling off a little bit of that paint and hopefully making it look a little bit more like realistic rock. And again, it's another thing where for the beginner, there's essentially no effort going on here. I've removed all the paint almost from that brush, hence the dry brush name. And you can really see the before and after there on the left and right of those pieces. But like I say, an effortless, really no skill level going on here way of creating rock. Since you put that texture down, it's going to have all those little crevices and valleys. Here's showing how quick this really can go. This isn't sped up. This is just normal speed. Where if you've textured it, it'll it'll do this, and it's a really fast way of creating a somewhat effective looking fake rock. So there, I've covered that with that light gray, and I'm going to go back in, and you could consider this like an optional stage. You could completely cut this out and make the project go faster, but just creating like green growth of some sort and really just tapping it. I'm not looking at an image and saying, okay, I need to have grass here, grass there, just kind of putting it randomly here and there and putting in some lighter green. Here's another great way of adding detail without any skill level. You're just putting dots. So I've got yellow paint, bright yellow paint, and just putting dots, and from a little bit of a distance, it looks like you've put more detail and effort than you actually have. And that's the same area right there. So those are a lot of different tricks to adding really good detail without a lot of effort. Here, mixing up some aqua color. So I've got green and blue and a little bit of white. And I'm going to try to put some color into the pond areas as if that water has a little bit of color to it. So painting the bottoms of those two ponds. And I'm going to try to create a water line. So this is something you're really going to want to do a test as to where the water is going to be. You can just make a guess as to where it's going to be, but so I used that footage from earlier, the test. And using a clean wet brush, I can kind of blend that edge, that waterline edge, so it doesn't look so artificial. Using a clean wet brush can really enhance the natural look of that line. Here's another thing you can do. Again, this could be another optional stage where you decide to save a little bit of time and effort, but putting in some fake cracks in the rock to sort of detail and separate one rock from another. That's fairly easy. You're just creating a really dark color and putting in a fake crack. So here is the sealing stage. You got a non-toxic sealant. Yes, I'm wearing a lab coat. I'm going to spray a good 4 layers on here if you're going to be creating this for a living creature. If not, 1 good layer or 2 good layers is probably good. But again, check out the materials list video, which goes over all this. So covering this, again, I've got a dollar store water bottle. I'm going to cover that with layers of that sealant, let that dry for a good 72 hours. Then I've got it outside because over all of the areas where there's going to be water, I'm going to apply silicone. Now this is aquarium grade silicone. So it is toxic when wet, but very safe when cured or dry. So I'm going to apply this in such a way where I'm going back and forth, just over and over the same area, trying to make sure that everything is covered, going maybe above where I know the water line to be by at least a ½ inch to an inch, just to make sure, because you really want to spend a good amount of time getting that silicone in and around every single area and crevice where you know water is going to be. So, and you'll definitely want to put it on every single area where water is going to be, even that ramp and cascading down that cylinder area. And there's going to be a little bit, at least in this particular design, where that second piece dips down into the water. So I'm just going to cover a little bit of that bottom of the second piece. Then I'm going to let it dry, let it sit outside, let it air out for a good 3 days. And then, so I've got that in that container out on my balcony. And you don't want to bring it indoors because it's really got a intense smell to it. So let it sit for a good 3 days to air out, and then I brought it inside and I let it sit for another 3 days before I did this test. But before that, I've got another step where you've got 2 pieces that are going to be put together, but you want to be able to take them apart. And because of that sealant, sometimes because it leaves behind this tacky surface, those 2 pieces have the potential to stick together. So I've got using the same sealant, sort of using it as a glue, painting on the areas where those two pieces are going to contact, and then putting non-toxic sand as sort of a barrier for those two pieces to not, stick together because of that barrier. So doing that to the second piece as well. Another thing you can do as a last step, if you want to increase the look of it being natural rock, is painting a little bit here and there with the same sealant, using it as a glue, and then putting non-toxic colored sand on some of the rock or grass areas just to increase the look of it. And then once that's dry after 24 hours, brushing that off, brushing all the loose sand off of those areas where the two pieces are going to connect. Putting in the water filter. Adding that covering. Pouring in some water, obviously, and there you have it, waterfall for the beginner. Be sure to check out the autumn-themed waterfall, as it is essentially the same design. It just goes into a lot more detail as far as what you can do and the paint job. But this is a good one to start out with. Again, you want to research whether or not your pet would enjoy this or appreciate it, or if you should just make this for yourself and leave your pet out of it. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment.